Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, 11 lines from the top. The Gemara on the previous Amud had brought a bryce in regards to Me'ilah, quoting a pasuk, V'chot'a b'shgaga, teaching us that only b'shoigeg will a person be chayiv a korban osham for being moyel. But if a person was moal b'mezid, he will not be chayiv a korban. He will not be able to bring a korban. The Gemara then brought the brisa that said, why not? We have a kal v'chomer. Why do you have to bring a pasuk? We already know from the fact that it states that when it comes to that which is chayiv a korban chatos, that means a person who's chayiv kares and thereby does something b'shoigeg is chayiv a korban chatos. And yet when he does ho b'mezid, he's not chayiv a korban. Me'ilah, that is not chayiv kares, so then certainly when he does so b'mezid, should not be chayiv a korban. The Gemara then rejected, the Bryce itself rejected this kal v'chomer by saying that Me'ilah has a chumrah that has misa b'dei shomayim. So the Gemara points out that there's an internal contradiction in this Bryce. At first, it wants to make a kal v'chomer saying that kares is more chamur than misa b'dei shomayim, and then it rejects the kal v'chomer by saying that misa b'dei shomayim is more chamur than kares. To which the Gemara now brings a resolution to explain this brisa by amending the words of the brisa as follows. Mar bred Ravona Amar Hochikon. This is what the brisa was saying. Loi ima marte b'shar mitzvos sheloi osa behen shehem ein miskaven kemiskaven. If you want to say, but it comes to shar mitzvahs, there we don't say that if a person does something shalom miskaven is like kemiskaven. In other words, when a person has kavana for doing something that is mutter to do, we don't say that he's going to be obligated if he does so and then does something that is osir, as follows. She'im niskavin lachtoich es hatolush v'chotach es hamechubar shepoter. If a person has kavana to do something that is mutter on Shabbos, like cut a vegetable, no problem cutting a vegetable on Shabbos, but instead he cuts that which is attached to the ground. His intention was for the vegetable that's detached. Lo and behold, it was attached. So we say that he's potter. That even though it is b'shoigeg, and b'shoigeg we say means either shiga Shabbos, he does not know that it's Shabbos, or shiga malacha, he does not know that this is a malacha. Over here, because he has kavana for that which is mutter, and he does that which is osir, it's lacking machsheves, meleches machsheves, and therefore he's potter from a korban chatos. However, says the Gemara, whereas when it comes to Mila, when he does have kavana for the thing that is mutter, and then he does and uses the thing that is osir, he is going to be chayiv a korban Me'ilah. In other words, we see that Me'ilah has a chumrah. When he knows that before him is the gizei chulin, the wool of chulin, as well as in his hands is gizei oila, which is prohibited, and he means to use the gizei chulin, but instead he uses the gizei oila. Here he is going to be chayiv a korban. Let's take a look at Rashi. Right before Rashi gets wide, it says in Dibra Masechet Toimar b'Me'ilah she'im niskavein v'chulei shamoal. When it comes to Me'ilah, we will say he's chayiv in such a scenario, even though he has kavana for heter, and he end up doing something that without kavana of iser, as follows. Kegoin hayukan gizei chulin v'gizei oila. He has before him two types of wool, one which is mutter and which was osir. V'niskavein lito shel chulin v'holcha yadoi al shel oila. He intends to use the gizei chulin, which is permissible. Instead, he uses that which is kadosh, the gizei oila. Umakehu mi oilo mi chulin. He knows which one is which. Elo shenistakel b'mokom acher. He gets distracted. Dahainu she'ein miskavein l'maises. That he doesn't have kavana to use the gizei oila. V'chayev me'ilah, and yet he's going to be chayev a korban me'ilah. The v'chatos bishgoga kol du ksiv. The pasuk states by me'ilah v'chatos bishgoga, and there it doesn't make any distinction. And therefore, so long as there's some sort of shoigeg in his chatos, he will be chayiv a korban. It doesn't say any type of exception. Like it does by Shabbos. Meleches machsheves. V'ksiv b'shar mitzvahs asher chata bo prat lemisasik. So we have a case where Me'ilah is more chamur. That is the response in the brisa that was quoted on Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar Hochik Omar. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak argues on what was just stated. He says to have kavana for heter and then do that which is osir, that is also included b'meleches machsheves to require your chayiv a korban chatos. In other words, let's say, for example, a person does not realize that it's Shabbos, he's b'shoigeg, and we had that scenario that we just brought before. He intends to cut a vegetable that's detached from the ground, which is mutter, and he instead cuts that which is attached to the ground. So here, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak will argue and say he would yes be chayiv a korban chatos. What is the scenario that he would not be chayiv a korban chatos on Shabbos, but yes, in Me'ili will still be chayiv a korban? As follows. Hochi kamar. Loi. He's saying back to him, Im amarta b'shar mitzvahs, shekein loy mischayiv bohen, she'ein misasek ki misatek. When it comes to all other mitzvahs, meaning to say, let's say on Shabbos, we don't mechayev a person by doing a transgression, an iser, which is going to be misasek together with loy misasek. In other words, as follows: She'im. This is the following case: Niskaven lahagbiya es hatolush. He intends to pick up that which is detached from the ground. V'chotach es hamechubar, and instead he cuts. He picks up a sharp object and accidentally cuts then something that is attached to the ground. Potter. Over here, he intends to pick something up. He doesn't intend to cut. He intends to pick something up. And instead he cuts. Over here, it will be considered to be that it's lacking meleches machsheves to be chayiv a korban chatas on Shabbos, but we will say that it is going to be chayiv a korban me'ilah as follows. A person puts his hand into a bowl in order to take out an object, and instead, while he takes his hand up, he realizes that it's a hand filled with oil that is kodesh, that is hekdesh, and therefore he's chayiv me'ilah. So here he doesn't intend to then to then anoint his skin. He intends merely to take out an object, but he anoints his skin. Here it's a case where he's misasek and ein misasek, and still he's going to be chayiv a korban me'ilah. So we see that Me'ilah has a chumrah. This is the two different types of ways of explaining the previous brisa that was quoted on Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Vaiter Omar Mar, Ba'med Devar Mamun. This is now bringing a statement that was quoted on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Ba'med Devarim Amun. When do we say that truma could become chametz? As follows: b'mafrish truma vehichmitza. If it was first truma on Pesach and then he was mafrish it on Pesach and it became chametz, that is possible. Or another possibility that's not mentioned over here is that before Pesach, if he was mafrish chametz as truma, that's also valid. However, if it's going to be again on Pesach, it has to be something that's not yet chametz, and then it can be mafrish it to make truma. Aval hifrish chametz truma divrei hakol einoi kedusha. But if he's mafrish chametz truma on Pesach, then everybody would agree that it's not going to become a valid hafrasha of truma. First of all, those who hold that chametz is aser behana makes it so that there's no value in the chametz, whereby you can't be mafrish truma if it has no value. But even according to Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, who learns that chametz is yes muter bahana on Pesach, even he will agree that if it's something that's chametz, you cannot be mafrish it into truma on Pesach. Where do we know that? Minohani mili, Omar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar Kro, because it states in the pasuk in regards to truma. It says Titein lo. I'll read you the entire verse. It states in regards to truma, Reishis degancha, the first of your grain, Tiroishcha v'yitzarecha, of your wine and your oil, Vereshis geis tzoinecha, and the first of the shearings of the wool of your sheep, Titain loy, you shall give it to the kohen, referring to truma. So going back to the Gemara, Omakra, it says Titain loy, that which you give to the kohen that he can go ahead and use and consume and eat. Veloy le'uroi, but not something that he has to then only put in the fire and get a benefit that way. So here we see that even according to Rabbi Yosef ben Haglili, that chametz, which is mutter behana, since it cannot be eaten by the kohen, it can't be then, you can't go ahead and mafresh chametz to make it into truma. It will be invalid hafrasha. Masi Rav Huna ber Rav Yoshua, Rav Huna ber Rav Yoshua asked on this limud, Ein turmin minatuma litahira. It states you cannot take truma of tar on tame. Tame ala tar. That means that if you have truma, if you have produce, and it is, you can't mafresh truma to take your truma out for this produce that is tahor, because you'll be mafsid the kohen by giving him truma that is tmeya. The only thing you can use it for is to then burn. You won't be able to consume it. However, the Mishnah goes on to say, "V'im toram b'shoygeg trumaso truma." If he did b'di'evid mafresh truma from such thing, he was mafresh truma tmeya ala tahara, then we do say it is valid. Ask the Gemara, ask Rav Huna ber Rav Yeshua, va'amai lema loy v'loy le'uroi. Let us say the drush that we just made before, according to you. Let us say that it's not only going to be a valid hafrashas truma if the kohen could go ahead and consume it. But if he cannot, we say loy v'loy le'uroi, whereby it's not going to be a good hafrasha truma. Says the Gemara, Lakasha hasam haisa loy shas hakoisher, hacha lo haisa lo shas hakoisher. No, over there in the Mishnah it says that it's valid is because it had a shas hakoisher, it had a moment of being possible, a moment of possibility that it was something that was valid before it became tamei. After it was picked from the ground, at that moment in time it could possibly been used for truma, and then it became tamei. So then we'll say that it's valid b'di'evid. Ask the Gemara, what would be a case where it was not, did not have a shas hakoisher, that it was not detached from the ground and had a moment of being tahor? The Gemara explains if it became chametz while it was still attached to the ground, even though normally something does not become fermented when it's still attached to the ground, but there are situations after it has become fully ripened and no longer gets any type of yanika from the ground. If water falls on it, it can become chametz. So that's the scenario over here. While it was still attached to the ground, where you could no longer, at that point you can't still mafresh into truma. You can only mafresh truma which is detached. So over here, it never had a moment of shas hakoisher. Aval echmitz b'talush hachinami the kodsho. But if it was indeed chametz when it was talush, that means it had a shas hakoisher. Then certainly it would become kadosh, and therefore b'di'evid it would be valid as a hafrasha. Omar lei. So then he responded after he made this drasha. This is Rav Nachem bar Yitzchak who made the drasha of Titein loy v'lo le'uroi, and he responded with the following pasuk. He says, "B'gzeiras irin pisgama." By the decree of the irin, over here refers to the malachim, the Talmidei Chachamim. Then he says, "Pisgaba b'meimar kadishin she'elosa." He says by the words of the sacred ones. He says also the rulings were said on my behalf. And similarly, my teaching, my rulings were stated in the Beis HaMedrash. In other words, what I did say about the drasha of truma, that it's only going to be a valid truma that can be given to a kohen if he can consume it, is going to be indeed the proper ruling. As it states in the pasuk, Titein loy v'loy le'uroi. Says Gemara weiter, Ki also Rav Huna berei de Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna berei Rav Yoshua continued and he asked, on top of Lamed Gimel with Beis, Omar, he said, Omar kra reishis. In regards to truma, it says reishis. Now, Rav Huna berei de Rav Yoshua, he's coming to ask, and he's saying, even if that which is chametz that is talush also can be sometimes used to make truma. I'm sorry, something that is detached from the ground, chametz that is tlusha, can also have a situation where it will not be valid as a hafrasha truma. In other words, he's arguing on what we just said. You just said that so long as it has a shas hakoisher, because it was picked and therefore before it became tameh, it was something that had a shas hakoisher. Therefore, b'di'evet you can use it to be mafrish truma. Kiyasa Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua comes and argues and says, even when you have chametz that is talush, also it will not be valid to go ahead and mafrish for truma. On top of Lamed Gimel Beis, Omar, he said, Omar Kro Reishis, because when you're mafrish truma, the pasuk says Reishis. It calls truma Reishis, whereby when you take out the truma, you have now Reishis truma in the hands of the kohen. The rest that remains in the hands of the bailim should be distinguishable as being permissible to eat. Reishis sheshiarea nikarin liyisrael. Once it is mafrish the truma, it now has the remaining crop in the hands of the Yisrael that is considered to be shiareha, its remnants, its remainder is nikarim liyisrael. It's recognizable to the Yisrael. And therefore, it could be eaten by the Yisrael. But yatzis azu, she'ein shayar nikarim. But when we're talking about chametz, so chametz, we're saying over here, granted before the hafrasha, it was tevel, and it was mutter ba'achila. Sorry, mutter ba'hana, but aser ba'achila. Even after you're mafrish it, so it's no longer tevel, but it still remains aser ba'achila. And therefore, even according to Rabbi Yossi, who says that chametz on Pesach is mutter b'hana, even he agrees that it's aser ba'achila. So even after one would take out what would be truma, his reishis to the kohen, it would not be shiareh that are nikarin Yisrael, because the same way that it was aser ba'achila before he separated the truma, so to now, even after separating what would be truma, is also not going to be mutter ba'achila. So therefore, it's no longer considered to be something that's a valid separation of truma, because it's not shiareh that are nikarin li Yisrael.